Welcome to The Score, where we make sense of hiring trends, we sort science from fiction, and find out what's new in talent acquisition from top experts in the field.
I'm Nicola Tatham, Chief IO Psychologist at Sova, with over 2 decades of experience designing fair, predictive, and science-backed talent assessments. I'm here to cut through the noise and talk about what actually works in hiring.
And I'm Caroline Fry, Head of Product. I spend my time turning smart assessment ideas from Nick into tools that work, scalable, inclusive, and ready for whatever AI throws at us next.
So each episode, we're joined by a guest to unpack a big question in hiring.
Because talent deserves better than guesswork.
So today, we're joined by Nick Brown. So Nick is Sova's Global Director of Professional Services. So he owns the end-to-end delivery of Sova's projects, ensuring implementations are on time, on budget, and aligned with client goals. So no pressure, Nick. And crucially, Nick also has over a decade of recruitment and talent acquisition experience under his belt, making him the perfect person to join us today to chat about what it really takes to deliver accurate, scalable, and science-backed hiring solutions.
Okay, Nick. Welcome. We like to kick things off with a light question. What is the weirdest, funniest, or just most baffling interview question you've ever come across? Whether you were the one being asked or you were watching it happen in your career in recruitment and talent acquisition.
So the weirdest one, or probably the most cliched one I've heard of, I wasn't asked it, but as a recruiter, I was recruiting people who went and met hiring managers, and one of the hiring managers used to ask candidates, if you were an animal, what animal would you be? I think we've all heard this one before. Mm-hmm. And some of the answers were quite good. Obviously you get usual lions and tigers, but one candidate said they'd be a chameleon, adaptable to any situation. Yeah. I mean, it's a terrible question, a terrible answer, so you get what you're given, really, don't you?
So I guess play that back. What would you be, Nick, if you were an animal?
Mm-hmm.
Probably a bald eagle. I don't know. I genuinely have no idea. Yeah, I mean, it's just a silly question, isn't it? Yeah.
Grand, majestic, authoritative. Yeah.
Yeah,
okay.
Bold. Yeah.
I like it.
Yeah.
Anyway, we digress. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Nick. Thanks for joining us. We're going to give you a bit of a grilling today, go through quite a few questions with you. So hopefully it won't be too painful and you will enjoy this. You know, we know you've been on both sides of the table. So you've acted as a recruiter, a buyer, and now you're actually leading the delivery. What would you say is one thing that people often sort of underestimate about implementing assessments and assessment solutions?
The internal effort, I think, is the most common one. So having been both sides of the fence, everyone is obsessed with how long a vendor, an assessment company like ourselves or otherwise, can take to do something. How long does it take you to build it? How long does it take you to configure it, deploy it, train us, give us the keys so we can go and start playing with the assessments? But quite frequently they don't give consideration to their own internal challenges of getting resource available, whether it's for integrations or simply the change management of, particularly if they're enterprise and global, of chaperoning potentially hundreds of different stakeholders internally to roll something out, and what that might mean in different regions, cultural differences and so forth. So I think it's always something, whenever I'm engaged in pre-sales with customers and they want to understand more about implementation, I always say we can do this to a certain degree as quickly as you want to go, but how quickly can you go is often the question I ask them.
And I guess it's within your power or your team's power to support clients with understanding what's down the road, from the very early conversations that we have. Even with the pre-sales conversations almost. Yeah,
absolutely. I think the thing about a good project manager will be doing is thinking 2 steps ahead of the client around what's coming down the road, but also, those lessons learned from other similar clients that have gone through similar transformations. No 2 clients are the same, they're all different, but certainly, some of those considerations of pace is often, most clients want to go really, really quick and get it done, but you have to balance time versus quality all the time. And usually it backfires if you prioritize pace over the quality of delivery. So it's not that I'm trying to get clients to go slower. I'm just trying to get clients to consider what they really need to do to make it successful to land internally with their stakeholders, but also with their candidate marketplace as well. Because as ever, your reputation is everything these days. We do share lots of pre-reading before they kick off and homework to try and drive them to think about the right things, but they should also reflect on what they've done when they've implemented other HR technologies, whether it's assessments or not, for that previously. So I think that's always a consideration. Yeah. I think as well, there's always a lot of focus with assessments on, in the buying processes, making it as scientifically accurate as possible from a customer side. But again, when you get in there and when we're in implementation phase, often they start to realize how difficult it can be to get, all the right people on a focus group or doing a survey or participating in a rigorous job analysis. Some of their data points might not be that great as well. So again, it's, we're here to support, consult and help, but there's still a bit of work that, a client needs to do as well. So yeah, that's really important, I think.
Sorry, I know, Caroline, you were going to ask a question, but I've got a burning one that I want to jump to. I think obviously every client, as you've just implied, wants that solution that's custom, that's fast, that's scientifically sound. How on earth do you manage those expectations and sort of juggle, they'll spin all those plates?
Yeah, I think particularly if it's a large implementation where there could be multiple strands or products that they want to implement, is trying to take a phased approach, whether that's in terms of the different products they're implementing or the different regions. So, for me, that's really important. I'd also say as well as having the right project team from a client perspective engaged. So, do you need 15 people on every call from your side? Do you just need one person on every call? Usually the number is maybe 4 or 5 people to sort of own certain topics. So I think that's one thing just from a doing perspective, is thinking really carefully about who's involved in that. And then making sure that team is empowered as well internally. Normally, most clients that we work with they come to us as experts, right? So we're paid to have an opinion and we want to guide them on it. So I think we just have to always be forthright on that. And customers need to, absolutely listen, take note. Of course, they know their companies far better than us. So they know sometimes, Nick, we do have to do it this way. But, here's how we can navigate that and pragmatically deal with that if we need to.
Thanks. I think related to that, Nick, as I listen to you, it's really dawning on me how much you straddle that divide between sort of the breadth of what you do, the consultancy, the advisory piece that your teams offer. I think you were sort of touching on this, that there's obviously, in many cases, macro or micro level, like there's things that clients ask for versus what they actually need, and how you and your teams go about navigating that gap, especially when, you're flexing between being the sort of experts and advisors, but also, hearing what the client's asking for and the unique, aspects and challenges within their organization.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that we do, or I have done in this, at Sova and in my previous life, both working for the vendors and in-house as well, is to spend a decent amount of time on discovery, right? We are working in a SaaS industry. So often, sometimes customers just want the keys to the car and go and drive it, right? But what we want to do first is do some discovery. Why have you bought? Why are you investing in assessments? Is it to replace something that isn't accurate? Is it a user experience issue? Is it a candidate experience issue? Is it a quality of hire? There's so many different reasons you might be investing in it. So we want to spend some time, of course we do that in the sales process and the solution architecture process, but equally when we get into implementation, we want to revisit that, because often we're moving from the buying team to some of the end users. We'll be working with recruiters, recruitment managers, potentially product owners internally, and they will have more hands-on experience. They'll be saying, well, this isn't what isn't working for us, or this is a problem in our recruitment funnel that we're trying to fix. We think assessments will help with X, Y, and Z, but it might not cover this piece. So by understanding what the problem actually is, we can be configuring, running the project, delivering the project in a way that's going to bring value to that. So yeah, I think that's the thing that I always want people to spend some time on is, a kickoff in the first couple of weeks. Why are we here? What do you want us to achieve? Not just, well, I want you to implement an assessment. Yeah, but why? Yeah, it's constantly saying why. So I think that's really, really important.
identifying what those metrics are and what you're going to be compared against at the end of the project, basically, yourselves and everybody else from the client side. What does success look like?
Yeah, sorry, Nick. Yeah, that's the scientist there. Give me the metrics, give me the numbers. Yeah, exactly. And I'm maybe jaded because I'm 20 years in this industry, not 10 years. So, but like the numbers are often quite hard to sometimes find for customers. I mean, they'll have some of them. So I'm always used to dealing with an incomplete data picture from funnels or whatever. But yeah, you're absolutely right. I think it is just that value piece constantly is coming back to that as well.
Without naming names, unless you can or you particularly want to, what's been one of your favourite client moments recently and why?
I don't think there's one standout, but having worked in SaaS implementation as an implementer for the last 8 years, I think it's just the delight you get to see working with recruiters, particularly as a former recruiter, when we've implemented something that is not only going to make their life easier and more efficient, but they're going to be able to spend time on the things that actually matter in their job. So I think that's where, and seeing that particularly at those sort of go live training weeks where you've done all the hard work and you're standing up a solution and seeing the delight from the team. And that's when it's gone really well, right? And the solution is on the money in terms of what it's there to do. That's always really satisfying for me. So, whether that's, a classic example 10 years ago for me was moving from a firm that were using lots of phone interviews and the recruiters were literally sat there, it could be 4 hours a day doing phone interviews. And you can imagine how boring that must get for them. As much as exciting finding candidates, but if you're doing it day in, day out, that's quite a churn. And to moving them to a video interviewing solution to perhaps something combined with, an assessment, and they get all these data points from the candidates they're reviewing instead of doing. They're spending more time on the quality candidates and doing more of a sort of white glove service with those. That job satisfaction that you're seeing, which, not always front of mind in the buying process, because it's often driven around efficiency and saving money and so forth and quality of hire, but actually people that are, in the middle there getting a lot more job satisfaction is really nice to see. I always enjoyed that.
I think, as usual, it's the impact on real people that ends up giving everybody the sense of satisfaction. I know that's true for us, even though, we all work in tech, in technology and SaaS, it's still the humans. That's why we're doing this, and that's what it matters.
Yeah, right. And of course, there's hiring managers that I've worked with where, again, they get really embracing of assessment data and outputs and see the value that brings. I worked with a really large defense company who their graduate scheme very prestigious, and they had a lot of hiring managers really engaged. Their graduate and apprenticeship hiring was almost part of the community because they would be hiring from the communities, often in places with not big populations. So when they would get to an assessment center, having the candidates gone through perhaps a new assessment, it was so real for the hiring managers and the recruiters to who they're interviewing, people that live down the road from them often. So they really paid heed and were big critics, if things weren't working. So when it did work, wow, that's always really, really satisfying. But equally, when you're widening the net out for them and seeing some things transform and disrupt, again, it's really exciting, really interesting.
So we're talking about data, we're talking about implementation, speed of delivery. What role does your team, i.e. the professional services team, play in protecting the integrity of that science while still keeping clients happy? I guess you're sort of acting as a gatekeeper of sorts there. How do they achieve that?
Yeah, I think it's a really good point, actually. And I used to sort of say I've worked with enough IOs that I can do a bit of an impression of them over the years. But I used to call it like the idiot's guide. I can provide the idiot's filter to sometimes what an IO is doing. That's not to say the IOs I've worked with are amazing, smart, brilliant communicators. But again, sometimes we're dealing with some really complex topics. And, if it's a large recruitment function and some of those recruiters might not have had exposure to assessments before, that's where my team should be able to speak and explain things and communicate things in a way that team might. So not saying that Nick, your team couldn't, because I know they can, but just sometimes it's being a bit of a double act in sort of, you might have the IO explain the science and, this is what we'd recommend, this is what we do. And often we're adding an extra voice in there to say, well, this is what it means in practice. So, we'd recommend that. So I think often we can be, the middleman, the kind of gatekeeper between the client and the IO, because maybe sometimes the IO is looking for that's very much that structured, scientific, we should always aim for the best. And that's exactly where we start. But obviously the PM or the implementation team might be in with that client and be able to sort of say, well, actually, I've worked with this client for a long time. I know what's achievable with them to get through, to get something live for them might need this, or I know they might struggle to facilitate such a, intensive job analysis in that time scale or whatever else. So I think it's sometimes just being that very pragmatic person in the middle, but equally being, as you say, Nick, a protector of what's our minimum professional standard as a vendor in this space, as an assessments expert. We all know this is a red line. We won't do this if we haven't got this. So I think it's being a double act, it's being a team to say, actually, it's, we're not being difficult. This is, if you're buying an assessment, this is how we're going to do it. And that's our professional standard.
Got to speak both languages, basically, haven't they? I think that's what I'm hearing. They're the constant across the project. Like you say, the IOs can sort of jump in and out at various different stages. So your team needs to be able to speak both languages. They don't need to know the whole dictionary, but they need to be able to understand the science and be able to explain it so that the customer understands why they're being asked to provide X number of people to take part in a pilot or a job analysis or whatever it is.
Definitely, yeah. I think often some of the best project teams I've worked with are working in tandem with the client team. So, for example, as you say, when we get to training, we're not just focusing on training on the platform, but we're also giving a basic understanding of what the assessment is doing, is scoring. And we're not doing a 3-hour, IO heavy explanation of the science and the history of assessments, but we're certainly giving them enough so they can feel confident explaining to a candidate, this is why the assessment looks like this is what it's doing, this is what it's looking at when it's scoring you.
In your opinion, what does scalable actually mean in our space, and where do people go wrong trying to scale?
Challenges is where when you're rolling out globally and it's complex, is trying to manage that localization versus perhaps consistency that you're striving for with, the quality assessment that you're wanting. So I think that they're not opposites. You can do that, but it's focusing your energy where it should be. For example, localizing the branding, the videos you might be using, the things perhaps around the assessment that, of course, they need to have the right look and feel, perhaps for a different brand of yours because it's called something else in a different country, or just the people that living there. It needs to be representative of the candidate marketplace and so on. That's where you focus your energy. Is it relevant to support an assessment in 15 different languages when your firm isn't operationalized in 99.9% English? No disrespect to any languages as I sit here speaking English in England, but is it relevant that if your application is done in English, does your assessment process need to be in English? Yes, it might be, it might not be. Obviously, I know Nick will say, well, if you're giving someone a personality assessment or some form of cognitive assessment, you want them to have the ability to do it in their native tongue to give themselves the best piece forward. So again, there's a constant balancing act of making sure you're supporting localization where it's relevant, but also maintaining a globally consistent structure if that's what you're aiming for. So I think that's one of the things that is important about something being scaled. Outside of that, it's just the usual things with big integrations. You might be working with some of the big HR tech providers, so being able to work with that and have something that sits in a workflow that's making sense is often the other piece as well, and navigating some of those complexities is really, really important.
I think you'll be pleased to know the hardcore grilling might be over.
Okay.
I think Nick's got a fun game for you now.
So fun. This is a little game that we call science or fiction. We're going to throw a few sort of statements your way. Some are based on science, others not so much. I don't think they're all that cut and dry, but we will see. So your
Don't give him
job...
a get out.
Oh yeah. No, they're all one or the other.
Yeah.
Your job is to tell us which is which, to help us just set the record straight on some of these statements. So I will start with my first one. If you can't explain an assessment to a candidate, you shouldn't use it. Is that science or fiction, do you think?
Oh, I think that's science, yeah. I mean, I'm not basing that on any science that I know other than just experience. You know, I've mentioned it earlier. I think it's really important when you're standing up an assessment that everyone that is administering it, using it from a kind of client perspective, has taken the assessment, had a go on it, understands how it scores, what it's doing, and be able to explain that to... Obviously, in this day and age, we talk about explainability of AI a lot, but you know, just being able to talk common sense to a candidate if they ring up and they're concerned or send an email in, being able to explain it in a way that they understand is really, really important. Yeah, I think that's a non-negotiable for me. I think any customer implementing assessment should be doing that, should be able to do that.
So the next one is fairness isn't a science problem, it's a design problem.
Oh, I think that's a bit of both, actually. I mean, obviously there has to be science there, so you need to be scientifically fair and, you know, have the data to show it's fair when we look at adverse impact, for example. But then that leads to design decisions, right? It could be, you know, weighting. It could be the type of assessments you're using, for example, where different groups perform differently, right? Again, this is me impersonating Nick again now, an IO. But I think it's a little bit of both. Of course, as well, now impersonating Caroline, from a product... Yeah, I was going to say, from a product perspective, you need to be able to make sure it's designed, you know, with accessibility in mind as well. So again, it's a question I get asked a lot in implementation is, you know, how would neurodiverse candidates deal with this? Or have you checked your platform for color blindness, or et cetera, et cetera? There's always some questions and considerations. So it's quite nice, actually, because everyone's trying to do the right thing and be fair 100%. So yeah, I think it's a bit of both. I think that one.
Yeah, I completely agree. And you can't do... An assessment is not going to be valid if the science isn't there. It's definitely not going to be valid. But if the design piece is not correct, then it's not going to be being used appropriately. And you know, it's all those sort of candidate buy-in as well. You know, if they've got no faith in it, then your validity is likely to drop as well. So yeah, I think that's a really good answer. 100%. Okay, the E&I. So I know Caroline's going to slap my wrists if I don't say this in full. So diversity, equity and inclusion starts with how you define success. Science or fiction?
Yes, science, I think. Again, I think, again, one of the things I love about assessments is ultimately you're trying to find a people that can successfully go and do a job, right? So that starts from a clear, you know, utopian point of view, but obviously then we work backwards and make sure we're doing a fair and equitable process as we go through it. So I think that's what I love about assessments, is it's moving away from, you know, a hiring manager hiring in their image, or, you know, the dreaded cultural fit question. Oh, they'll get along with the team because they can come to the pub with us on a Friday night. You know, those sorts of things which narrow your talent pool as an organization. So I think, yeah, you know, ultimately, I think it goes a long way if you're hiring in a leveraging assessments, using the tools at your disposal and doing a fair process, then your DE&I strategy naturally, without even necessarily trying, should hopefully, you should see some improvement in terms of diversity of hire through that, because you're starting off from a fair place. So yeah, no, I think it definitely starts with that. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. So we're nearly there. A scientifically valid assessment can still feel unfair.
Yeah. I mean, we've all been there doing an assessment and feeling like we're getting absolutely battered by it. So yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think I've probably taken more assessments not applying for jobs in the last 10 years than I did in the previous 10 years. And some of them I know are hard, but they're designed to be hard. And again, that's where candidate expectations need to be managed, that communication. Have you put something on your website? We use these assessments. This is what you should expect. So you don't dishearten people and think, oh, this is really hard, but actually they might be smashing it. They just don't know. So I think that's often, a real concern of mine actually, is that people feel that something's too hard and therefore unfair, where the reality is actually it's making you sweat. Because you're giving it the attention. It's designed to be hard. Certainly, even with the personality assessments that obviously we've worked a lot with over the last couple of years, Nick, that it can, even just like the imagery differences in some of the personality assessments can be quite hard. And I know that's by design, because stopping you gaming it. I think it's a natural thing. Sometimes it will be hard.
I would challenge that a little. I think there's a difference between unfair and really hard. I think if we break that statement down a bit, it can still feel unfair. Unfair to me hard might be one level, but if it feels hard and inappropriate for the role. So I think this just goes back to that sort of face validity piece. If you are asking me to burst balloons and I'm not, on a screen and I'm not very good at bursting balloons, then that might feel unfair, even though it might be valid and predictable. So I've got to buy into it. So I think it sort of goes back to one of the points that you just hinted at, which is around communicating with candidates up front as well. So this is what to expect in the assessment. This is why we're asking you to complete this assessment. So the comms, it's not, you've talked about comms a lot from the sort of client rollout perspective, but the comms with candidates is so important, especially when we start to talk about candidates with neurodiversity as well. Just getting the communication right is vital. And then a really difficult assessment can still feel fair, even though you're going through a very challenging situation. So I think there's nuances to that statement.
Mm-hmm.
We probably don't need to spend any more time on it.
No, you're better at this than me, Nick. I'd agree actually. I certainly think when we go back to our first question, which is inappropriate interview questions, like you said, it's quite hard to think of an animal that you describe yourself as, and like you said, it's totally irrelevant to the job. So it's a pretty, again, I'm simplifying, that's what I do. I'd agree with that, definitely. I think that's a really good point.
Okay, so our last statement is psychologists are the original UX designers of hiring.
User experience.
Thank you.
Yeah. Being married to a user experience researcher, and I feel like I'm work married to psychologists, Nick, as well. So I feel like I'm surrounded by them. I think I'd agree. To some extent, I agree with that. I think it's okay. I'll give my sort of off the cuff response, which is I think that maybe not 40 years ago, it was all about the science, and some of the tests and that would be kind of not that user friendly, and the way we'd approach things. I think again in the last 20 years, I think so much importance has been put on user experience, and it kind of goes hand in hand now. And I know so many of my IO colleagues will always be thinking, is it scientifically valid, but is this appropriate in terms of the amount of time, what we're asking the candidates to do? Is the experience delightful or not awful? I think these days in the world we're living in and the way products are maturing is that not UX not being awful is not good enough anymore. It needs to be delightful and something that someone feels it's a good process to go through in terms of a user journey and so forth. So I do think that the two things go hand in hand to a certain degree. Are they the original thinkers? Maybe not. I don't know. I haven't known enough IOs long enough to say that, but I kind of think so. In this day and age, they are definitely always thinking like that. But you're going to tell me off now, Nick.
Is that multidisciplinary approach that we have no choice but to take now, because we aren't professional UX designers.
That's
as
where
IO,
my team comes in.
but we know people who are. Yeah. So Caroline will attest to the amount of hours that my team work with her team when we're rolling out a new assessment, a new part of the platform. We cannot work in isolation. I'll say anymore. I don't think we ever have, but I just think UX has become more and more and more important to our clients and to our candidates. So I think, and we sort of ended the last podcast we did on this, which is this multidisciplinary working. It's so important to be able to provide great solutions for our customers. So that's the end of my statements. Thank you, Nick.
Thank you both. You're welcome.
Yeah. And Nick, this has been really insightful, great for me selfishly, and I hope everyone to hear more about the value that your team brings. So thanks for your time and expertise. Just before we sort of close this episode, if there's one thing you want people to remember, what would it be?
I think it's if I'm just talking about implementation, I think it's that consideration to, we're not asking you to build a bridge or you do lots and lots of heavy lifting, but there is a little bit of due thought and consideration that you need as a client if you're going to invest in some assessments, is to think about what you're trying to achieve and how you want to go about doing it. Yes, we can do things quickly, but there's still some good common sense things that you should think about as you roll this out internally, externally, what that looks like. So I think being thoughtful, because we can certainly do most of the lift and heavy thinking for you, but there is going to need to be a bit of participation with that. And, I think that client vendor relationship is really, really important. So yeah, that's what I'd say I'd want people to take away.
Yeah, I think thinking back on everything that you've shared, for me, from my product perspective, I think the value that your team brings is that continued success in the enablement of the platform, including the assessments, like the effort that they put in working through with you what they need, what they're targeting, what success looks like, and you guiding them and advising them through that process just means the outcome they get at the end is much closer to what they're looking for when they bring a vendor like us on. I think my appreciation of you was always very great, but I think hearing the detail of what you guys go through to really make sure that the platform, the assessments, the whole thing works as expected, delights. That's a very product term that I'm really happy to hear you using so much, like delights the clients that we work with, is really great. So thank you from me for everything that you put into making what we do so successful.
You're very welcome. Me and the team. It's definitely, again, it's multidisciplinary, multi-team. So yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
And I've always appreciated you, Nick.
Yeah.
I'm late to the party.
Yeah. I think my one of my takeaways from this is the importance of that partnership approach that you demonstrate with our clients, and for clients to understand that when we do perhaps ask challenging questions or hold them to deadlines, all of that is coming from that sort of partnership headspace, which is we're in this together. And we want to delight you, and to achieve that, we're going to have to challenge you. What do you want to measure? Why are you doing it in that way? Can you achieve this deadline that we're mutually agreeing to? So I think partnership is a really key word that came out of the last few minutes that we've been talking through.
Definitely. We all want the same thing. I want, when I work with clients, when I'm working with their project managers and team, I want them to go and get all the plaudits internally in the world because they've delivered something with real value to their business that could drive more profits, could drive better recruitment. It's so impactful. At the end of the day, you're dealing with people and people's jobs. I'm quite passionate about that. So when it goes well, it's the best job in the world, because you just see, within a short space of time, things can transform and have a real impact on what an organization is trying to do. Can be challenging, but ultimately you do get there one way or the other, usually. Yeah.
Thanks so much.
Thank you both.
Thanks, Nick, for hanging out with us on The Score. And to our listeners, if you enjoyed this deep dive into candidate experience, fairness, and making assessment rollouts actually work, don't miss what's coming next. New episodes drop every 2 weeks on YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your talent assessment insights.
You two are so good at this, honestly.